With the release of the Mrs.P update, many other things have been added inside Piggy, and I'm not talking about the skin itself, but rather the lore. Today I want to focus on the secret notes that were added in book 1 and explain the story of Mr. and Mrs. P. Let's start by analyzing the ending of the Mrs. P skin quest, and then we'll move on to talk about the secret notes. So, what can we learn from the ending? First of all, we know it takes place before the infection, because we can not only see Mrs. P, but we can also see their old home, the barn. And we've actually seen this barn before, back when Mr. P used to only be just a millionaire from the Regarding the Rumors video, meaning that this flashback is happening after the Regarding the Rumors clips. This flashback is actually not that old, and it's showing Mr. P as a billionaire, not a millionaire anymore. But how do we know this? Well, in the same flashback, Mr. P starts asking Mrs. P about how she's feeling, showing how this basically takes place after Mrs. P got the so-called antidote that should have cured her disease, but instead started the entire infection. And we can confirm the timeline even more, because after she replies that she is feeling good so far, she's asking, how are the others? Most people not knowing who are the so-called others. However, it's pretty obvious. Mrs. P was referring to the Piggy family, because we know from the true ending of Plant that they were the first ones to take the cure in order to see if it works, and after that, Mr. P would also give it to Mrs. P. So this confirms that the flashback was taking place just after the Piggy family and Mrs. P got the so-called antidote. And that's kinda how it ends, but there is more. While the Mrs. P skin quest was happening, another secret update released, adding a quest that would give you a Mrs. P NPC inside build mode. And in order to unlock this NPC, you had to collect multiple secret notes throughout book 1 chapters. And let me tell you, these notes just revealed a lot of new lore for Mr. and Mrs. P. The only problem, however, is that there were so many that even now it's complicated to line them up in the correct timeline. But I think I have found the correct order. And this is it. The first note in the correct order can be found in the school chapter, and it says, I met a wonderful girl. She was kind, sweet, and purple. I don't have many friends, but I hope I have found one in her. This note is telling us that Mr. P used to be a child with not that many friends that studied at the same school from chapter 5. Not only that, but inside this school, he has also found another purple potato that instantly became friends with, that being Mrs. P. The second note is probably wrote years after the first one, because it says that Mr. P has finally managed to propose to the girl of his life, Mrs. P, and that he cannot wait for the future. But let's start some theories now, because the third note is pretty confusing. Because here, Mr. P says that he has helped a company that was slowly falling in business, due to their CEO being gone. So, what company is this, and why were they falling in business? Well, I theorized that this was the PSTMM company, and here's why. After the public has seen the employee-only tape called Hello Employee, everyone started throwing accusations against the PSTMM company, and as we know, the company itself was falling in business because of it. Madsen, the CEO, even started having aggressive arguments with his own employees, and nothing was working for them. And all of this now links with the note, because Madsen along with Harry have tried to make a response video by getting famous people to endorse the company's reputation and affirm that the accusations are false. One of those famous people being Mr. P. So I theorized that this note is telling us how Mr. P has finally accepted to promote and endorse the PSTMM company in order to help them and get a fair share from it. But now let's move on to the next 3 notes, because these 3 are linked to each other. The first one is telling us how Mr. P is struggling with his carnival, but Mrs. P still believes in him and thinks that he will sooner or later be successful with his carnival. Not only that, but this note also says she reassures me her job as a doctor is enough for the both of us. And that's a new detail that we never knew before. Mrs. P was working as a doctor inside Lucella, but we'll learn a bit more about it on the third note. However, the next note is telling us that after a long time, Mr. P finally became successful with his carnival. Quoting him, "The carnival has finally become everything we wanted it to be." And this is probably the reason that he became a billionaire. And on the third note, Mr. P tells us that after the massive success of the carnival, Mrs. P tried to resign from her job as a doctor. However, the higher-ups have begged her to not do it, because Lucella simply didn't have enough doctors already. So she kept her job, being happy that she can still help the people in need. But now, let's move on to the more recent notes. This one can be found in the hospital, and it is written exactly when Mrs. P was sick. As you all remember, in the Ali's map, news started spreading that Mr. P's wife, Mrs. P, has gotten sick with a disease called glioma, and how Mr. P, a successful billionaire, has donated over 40% of his bank funds to research facilities in order to find a cure for his wife. And that's exactly what this note is telling us. And inside the Outpost chapter, we can find the following note talking about how Mr. P has waited long enough and that he thinks he's finally developed a cure that can save her. Telling us that the family will come at the end of the week to do a test run. Of course, he's referring to the Piggy family. But we arrive at the timeline we all know, because Mr. P wrote his final note. A note that thanks Mrs. P for being the best, that he enjoyed every second with her. But sadly, everything must come to an end, and he finally realized that he lost her, that Mrs. P was now infected. And those were all the notes wrote by Mr. P. But we have one more hidden note that was wrote by a mysterious person, and this can be found inside the city chapter in Mrs. P's room. And it says, "Mr. P led us right to where she would be. We can't let anyone find her. We won't disappoint you, sir." This is an extremely important and mysterious note, because it looks like a group of people have somehow found Mrs. P, and they have taken her to a place where nobody else can find her. Not only that, but it looks like whoever this group is, they are all working for one person. Seeing how in the note it says, "We won't disappoint you, sir." This note could be very important, because we can now theorize more about Mrs. P and whoever these people are. And I cannot wait to start theorizing these mysteries. But what do you think about all of this? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you all in the next video. Thanks for watching.